webinar, A Fixed EU Minimum Wage, a Necessity or a Burden for SMEs. First, thank you to our host today, Stefanec, member of the European Parliament, also president of SME Europe of the EPP and also board member of SME Connect. We have also today very distinguished guests and speakers. The keynote will be by Oscar Waglund Soderstrom, International Director, Swedish Confederation of Professional Employees. I think I pronounce your name in the correct way. Super. Then interventions by Marc Angel, member member of the European Parliament, Ample Committee. Thank you that you are today here. Then Michal Drozdowicz, I hope pronounce it in the right way. Nearly.
Nearly.
Drozdowicz. You see, head of section social policy, permanent representation of the Republic of Poland to the EU. Then Mr. Jakub Binkowski, director, legal department, Union of Entrepreneurs and Employees, ZPP. And me, Horst Heid, chair of the European Steering Committee of SME Connect. And we start directly with the welcome and opening of Stefanec. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Horst, and good morning, everybody. I'm happy that we can discuss this morning such an important issue as the minimum wage. I'd like to make 3 points at the beginning. First one is that basically salary is the result of supply and demand, and we should recognize that we have different wages and we will have different wages in the countries and also in different regions. So I'm aware of the fact that it is a subsidiarity issue, and basically I have my concern if there is any kind of unification from European level into subsidiarity issue, into social cost issue. Second point is that this is highly topical point, and also in my country, Slovakia, there was a lot of experience in couple of years, particularly Slovak socialist government used it as the political tool, and at the end, by the analysis after 5 years now, it showed that the winner from increase of minimum wage was the state, not employees, because of relatively high taxes and social costs. State received much more by increasing minimum wage than employees. And third point is that basically the reason to establish some mechanism for minimum wage across the European countries is that minimum wage should protect workers with low wages, but in the end it is damaging, because particularly for them, because it might kill job opportunities for low-income peoples. So now, in times of coming economic crisis, I'm quite concerned to push for establishment of any kind of unification from European level. And I'm happy to discuss all the kinds of this issue, all the aspects. And if we have a question of this webinar, a necessity or a burden, from my point of view, I'm concerned that it might be burden, particularly for small and medium entrepreneurs who we represent, and which is the most important part of European economy, as we know. So those were my short points at the beginning, and I'm really looking forward to our today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. I think you gave us really already a clear statement what you're thinking about the minimum wage, but only because we have also SMEs here from Europe who are taking part of the webinar. It is in the discussion, the public discussion. I think it's to mention that from we have from 43 states in Europe, 29 have already minimum wages. So it is nothing new. The discussion is now how coordinated or implemented it could be by the European Union too. And I think what is also very good to know, there is not so much really verified data how SMEs are impacted by such a regulation. So I tried to find some data, but how they coming to these numbers is not very clear. But when you read the newspapers and so on, they're expecting that around 50% of SMEs are affected by minimum wages. And this would be under the circumstances that, like Commissioner Schmidt mentioned, that the meridian should be used of 60% of the income of the different member states, and also taking account the productivity. So I think this is the basic what we are discussing today. And we start with the keynote, and I think this is also what I read, that Eastern Europe and in Scandinavia, we have there different perspectives what would be really the outcome of such a regulation. And we welcome very much Oskar Waglund Soderstrom from the Swedish Confederation of Professional Employees, and he has today the keynote, and I think then after this we have the intervention and the discussion, the pro and contras of the idea of Commissioner Schmidt. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. I really appreciate that you provide this forum for a discussion about a topic that is so currently high on the EU agenda, very much as a result of the COVID crisis, of course. I represent TCO, that's the Swedish abbreviation. It's the Swedish Confederation of Professional Employees. It's one of the 3 Swedish main trade union confederations. We organize 13 member unions with a total of almost 1.5 million white-collar workers who are professionals across the labor market, both in the private and the public sector, like engineers, school teachers, nurses, police and customs officers, theater actors, for instance, not just to name a few. Since the topic of today's seminar is a fixed minimum wage, let me start very bluntly that we are very critical towards EU legislation on wages. I'll come back to why in a minute. Across Europe, the COVID crisis has been a very tough time for businesses, as we all know, and we will not see the end of it for quite some time. This has resulted, of course, in a very tough situation for workers as well. And some figures tell us that about 60 million workers in Europe may lose their jobs from this tragedy alone. Since March this year, when all this started, the COVID crisis, the Swedish trade unions have had their busiest days in history. In the care sector, they've worked to ensure that healthcare professionals can have as decent working conditions as possible, despite the high pressure on hospitals. In the private sector, their job has been to mitigate the effects and find solutions to avoid that normally sound businesses go bankrupt and will have to lay off their workforce. Altogether, thousands of collective agreements have been reached between trade unions and employers to avoid job losses and to mitigate the consequences of the crisis. This, ladies and gentlemen, is how the Nordic model works every day. This is how we use social dialogue to adapt working conditions to sudden changes that we could not foresee, to find solutions in the interest of employers and workers together that fits a certain sector or workplace. And finding these kind of snap solutions in a crisis have proven to be one success for social dialogue. But strong social partners are also important in the slow, constant struggle against inequalities, income inequalities. The rise of income inequalities increasingly being recognized as a major issue with the potential to have a corrosive effect on societies. As millions of Europeans have lost or now run the risk of losing their jobs as a result of the pandemic, income inequalities are likely to increase even more across Europe. International organizations like the IMF, the World Bank, and the OECD recognize the power of strong social partners and a strong social dialogue to reduce inequalities and to reach greater cohesion and economic growth. The OECD has even underlined in a recent report that collective bargaining should be used as a tool in a changing world of work to tackle emerging challenges related to digitalization, for instance. So strong trade unions and employers' organizations, a high level of collective bargaining, as well as a high degree of social protection, that's not an obstacle to, but a recipe for a strong economy. The Nordics, I would say, is a living proof of that. Small and medium-sized enterprises represent about 99% of all businesses in the EU. That's quite a high proportion. In the past 5 years, they have created around 85% of all the new jobs and provided 2/3 of the total private sector employment in the EU. In this respect, your contribution, the contribution of SMEs to Europe's economy and to the recovery from the crisis is invaluable. But please also keep in mind your importance to social dialogue in Europe. Your sector plays a key role in collective bargaining throughout Europe. But while we believe that collective bargaining is a precondition for successful and sustainable economies, we also believe that relations between social partners and issues related to collective bargaining and wages should remain at national level. And why is that? Well, first of all, there is a legal aspect to this. We all know that there are clear limitations as to what the EU can and cannot do. Article 153 of the treaty states very clearly that the Union does not have competence when it comes to wages. In fact, we see this article as a safeguard clause, which has made us feel very confident that wage setting will remain at national level so far. Secondly, because traditions and practices in this field differ between member states. While collective bargaining is strong in Germany, the Netherlands, and Italy, and Denmark, and Sweden, how we negotiate and the way wages are set look completely different, I think already was mentioned here. In Sweden, Denmark, and some other countries, wage setting is the responsibility and in the hand of social partners alone. Governments are not involved, and we are in 100% agreement that this is the way to go, that we do not want any interference from the state or from the EU. And since social partners are in charge, that means that Nordic countries do not have any minimum wage legislation. Our minimum wage for each sector are set through collective agreements alone, but still we have among the highest wages in Europe, also in sectors where collective agreements are more rare. And our fear is that state or EU intervention through binding rules on minimum wages and collective bargaining can be detrimental to this model of running the labour market, which has proved to be successful now for decades. Thirdly, an EU-wide regulation with a one-size-fits-all formula determining minimum wage levels in all member states would simply not provide the desired results, as wage levels differ too much. Just to take an example, I think the Commission's original idea that was already mentioned here was to set the minimum wage as 60% of median wage in each member state. In a country like Bulgaria, this would have led to a minimum wage, to a reduced minimum wage compared to today's situation, in practice a race to the bottom. I have now referred to the situation very much in the Nordics. I'm very much aware that social dialogue does not deliver in the same way in many other member states. If we look at the situation now and before the financial crisis more than 10 years ago, we have witnessed a dramatic drop in membership figures for trade unions and for employers' organizations across Europe. And this is why in many member states, minimum wages set by law are absolutely necessary in order to uphold a well-functioning economy, decent working conditions and purchasing power, and to fight in-work poverty. But how to do this must be up to each member state. It's not unlikely that the COVID crisis may lead to millions of citizens ending up in poverty and marginalization. We need to work closely together to turn this situation around, to make sure citizens across Europe can be part of the green and digital transition, acquire new skills and enjoy decent jobs that are safe in an economy that is likely to become even more globalized. The EU certainly has a role to support member states to improve social protection and building national systems for transition. And this is where a strong social pillar comes in and why it must be part of the EU recovery plan. A social pillar that's used as a framework to issue recommendations, to follow up, to co-finance projects while fully respecting national labour market models. Improved conditions for social dialogue between employers and trade unions across Europe can play a key role in the recovery of the European economy. But we need to promote this dialogue and collective bargaining by other means than legislation. We believe that funds should be earmarked within the European Social Fund and the new Recovery Fund to support capacity building, to build and support social partner structures at national level. We should also use the European semester as a tool as it is, not only to demand macroeconomic reforms. We should use it as to stimulate better social dialogue and collective bargaining where and when it's needed. And we need more and better analysis identifying barriers to social dialogue in individual member states, for instance, through the European semester and the Dublin Foundation. Swedish trade unions have also called on the Commission to nominate an ombudsman, a spokesperson for social dialogue at EU level, who can support and monitor social dialogue development and be a link between member states and the EU. So to conclude very quickly, in this time of deep crisis, there is no doubt a clear need for the EU to take action on improving relations on the labour market, to support member states in reducing income inequalities and raising social standards. But we believe binding legislation, in particular on wage setting, is not the way forward. There is no legal base. It could destroy well-functioning labour market models that have proven to be successful, and it would miss the target, as it's simply not possible to find a benchmark that would fit all member states. And that's why we strongly urge the Commission to reconsider its plan to put forward this framework directive on minimum wages. Thanks very much, and I look forward to a discussion.
Thank you very much, Oscar. I think you gave us a brief overview of different points we have to discuss, and your statement is clear to understand. It's also about the autonomy of collective bargaining. I think also the success story of Scandinavia. But now we're coming to the first interventions to Marc Angel. I'm thinking, I read already some statements from Commissioner Schmidt, who was answering that he wants not to interfere to autonomy of collective bargaining. He's in favor of this system. Is there a misunderstanding, or is really the plans of the Commission going too far, or do we need only more clarification? Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for inviting me. Just to come back to what you said right now, every time I hear Commissioner Schmidt using the word minimum wage, I hear in the same sentence collective bargaining. So I think this has been throughout December, or when he was in his audition in the Parliament, but also in December in Strasbourg in the plenary. And every time I hear him in interviews, I read him in interviews, not later than this week in a major Luxembourg newspaper, where he talked about the minimum wage, always collective bargaining in the same sentence. And I think the whole idea, for me at least, the whole idea of this minimum wage, European minimum wage, is to offer a decent quality of life to the workers, and not only that they can survive of their work, but they can have a decent life. And this is important. And I also believe, and also Commissioner Schmidt and many people know, that it creates a greater incentive to work, and it will improve productivity. And fair minimum wages, whether they are set through legal provisions or collective bargaining, I think they are the key to protect the low wage earners. And they're also the best mean to protect and prevent in-work poverty. You know that in-work poverty is an issue which is of biggest concern, and it is growing, and we have to fight against that. And also minimum wage is also a mean to prevent wage reductions. And I think this is also something we shouldn't forget. And I don't think we should oppose enterprises, small and medium enterprises and workers. I think it's the whole, we have to work together, and we shouldn't oppose them. And we have to find an equilibrium to allow enterprises to stay competitive on the market, but on the other hand, offering high working standards and good salaries to the people who work there. And therefore, I think that SMEs, and this is also done and has to be done more, has to be treated on a different level than the big multinational enterprises. And here again, this is why we defend collective bargaining and social dialogue so much, because on the different sectorial levels, you can adapt the rules for the different sectors of small and medium enterprises. And I think that is very important. And I think there's nothing better than representative of the enterprises, of workers and the state around the table to really contribute in finally coming to a real social market economy. Especially now in COVID times, we have learned that the theory of neoliberalism and those who say the market will regulate everything, this has been proven wrong, especially now. And therefore, I also think that we should learn and not waste this COVID crisis and learn from other crises. I appreciate in one way that there is a paradigm change in the European Commission. Remember, after 2008 and the financial crisis, often we heard from the Commission, wages have to be cut, unemployment benefits have to be cut, with all the consequences we now know it had on the economy of those countries, on the economy, under the internal demand, and it destroyed more companies and also more workplaces and therefore I think we have to learn from that. What I also wanted to say is that this step of having a discussion on the minimum wage and having this consultation, the first phase, which was started And of course, this is foreseen by the treaties. We have to do that. And now we come to the second phase of this consultation, that the Commission is in a listening mode. And I don't think the Commission ever wanted to have a unique minimum wage, and they repeated it in many ways. Commissioner Schmidt always said, it's not about harmonizing minimum wages or impose one model of wage setting over another. But I think the aim of Commissioner Schmidt and the Commission is to strengthen national system in full respect of national traditions. And so therefore I say it again, when talking about minimum wage, Commissioner Schmidt always mentions the promotion and the strengthening of collective bargaining in this context. So, and he also repeats often that the Nordic model should not be put in danger. And I think the first travels Commissioner Schmidt made when he became Commissioner for Employment and Social Affairs was traveling to the Nordic countries, to Denmark and Sweden and Finland, where I believe he had not only talks with government officials, but also with enterprises and also with trade unions. And I think this is a sign that the Commission and this idea about the minimum salary is not that with an axe they want to destroy everything there is and impose something, but I think they will come out with a set of conditions and mechanisms that member states have to apply when they establish their own minimum wage, and without the fear. And I think what is very important, what I feel when I listen to the Commission, is that there should be no fear that the European regulator will lower the standards. This is a fear I can understand from the Scandinavian side, but I think this has been very well understood, and I trust Commissioner Schmidt. I'm from Luxembourg, and it's not because of that I trust him, or not because of from the same political family, but I know his feeling and how important social dialogue is. This is a tradition in Luxembourg too, that state officials, enterprise officials, in English, the representative of the business and then also trade union sit on a table and come up together with good solutions which are beneficial for all. I know his talent and of negotiation, so therefore I think we should give the second consultation a chance, and then I don't think that there will be something imposed. I think this will be done in a dialogue, because you cannot promote social dialogue as a Commission and then not when you do your own rules, not apply it. So I think we shouldn't worry. It's normal that everybody defends his position, but I don't think that a minimum salary will be a burden to small enterprises. And it is a necessity, and it's an obligation that we have to do together, and not opposing one against the other. That's for the moment what I would like to add to this very interesting discussion. And let me just, I just regret a little bit that we don't have a female representative, because in these times of COVID, it was women especially who helped us get through this crisis, and especially in jobs where they're very low pays, and the minimum wage, just, you know, I'm also a bit of a feminist. The minimum wage is also a very good mean to help closing this gender pay gap, which is also still a problem of inequalities in many countries. So thank you very much again, and I'm looking forward for a fruitful discussion with all the friends and here on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angel. I think you make good points and give the counterpoints to what we heard before. We are still in the discussion, so you say, but I think the basic question is what I get from Soderstrom. Is this really the point to regulate by the European Union? And only to make a link back, I want to make it a little bit interactive. Mr. Soderstrom, what you heard, Oscar, from Mr. Angel, is this what you wanted to hear, or you have still worries?
Well, I think this illustrates the differences we have on different labor market models in Europe. Because when you say, Mr. Angel, that you, well, first of all, I mean, I do not doubt the ambitions of Commissioner Schmidt. He's a very good person, and I very much appreciate this Commission's new ambition to raise social standards, of course, but we can do it in different ways. When you mentioned the social dialogue, the example from Luxembourg, you mentioned state, employers, and employees. That is the basic difference. For instance, in the Nordic countries, the state is not part of it. It's the employers and the employees alone that do these deals. And that's the reason why it has worked so well and so flexibly, I would say. And also when it comes to the ambitions from Commissioner Schmidt to, you know, when he always mentions, I agree on that, collective bargaining and minimum wages at the same time. The problem is that he cannot make such guarantees because the Commissioner is not the one who will interpret the directive, and it will be the Court of Justice. So what we have a problem with is that we don't see these waterproof guarantees and safeguards that we will be able to keep the model that we have without statutory minimum wages, because that will be a disturbance to the system we use in our country and other countries.
Thank you. Perhaps, Mr. Angel, only short. If we need such European approach, is this also not a little bit mistrust that some member states regulate their own social affairs by themselves? Why, if he's speaking always about, I'm only advocate diabolo, some people would say, why Brussels has to regulate this? Why you think it's needed and not the voters in elections in different countries would say, I would vote for the party who is for minimum wage? Why you think it's necessary to have this approach on the European level, please?
Yeah, first of all, when you say Brussels has to regulate this, before I was an MEP, I was a member of the National Parliament for 15 years. And I know that Brussels is not some weirdos who sit in Brussels, but Brussels there is representative from all the countries, elected ones, there is commissioners from every country, and there is a civil society also, and representatives. So Brussels as a whole is not totally disconnected from what happens in the countries, and especially in the European Parliament, and I see it also with the Commission, we have so much contact with civil society and debates with civil society and contact with trade unions, be it the European level now, and so you cannot say that Brussels would just produce something and then the others have to swallow it. This is not the way Europe works. But on the other hand, I don't think that the idea of the Commission is to have first of all, not a regulation, which is, I think they want to have a directive which has to be transposed and where the member states really can in the negotiations also in the council. This is not, the Commission alone doesn't dictate. There is the council. We have the mechanism. I don't have to explain it to you. You know how it works. So I think there is room to really control. If the Commission, when they say they want to respect national traditions and national specificities, that there is room to check that and to create guarantees for that. And I think it's a very difficult task which Commissioner Schmidt has, because I think there has to be a lot of mechanisms of calculations and of because not one model fits all, and therefore it's going to be a very difficult task and maybe very technical in the beginning, but for specialists as you are, I think there will be a solution which will satisfy everyone. But there will be a lot of discussions and a lot of fights. I don't like the word fights, but a lot of combating from each side. But I hope we will reach, if we want to implement the European Pillar of Social Rights, if we want to promote social Europe, and we will not be successful in this undertaking, I think that would be not a good start. And the priority has been put on this. There will be an action plan of implementing the European Social Pillar, all these just transition measures which are announced by the Commission to promote social Europe. The minimum wage was now the first one we work on, and it would be a wrong sign if we would not we would not come forward and not really have a good result in this, that would, to my sense, break this dynamism of finally not only having a social Europe on a paper, but also trying to implement it. And COVID has helped a lot. I see it also in the committees now when we come to different questions. There is a lot of sensibilities also from other political groups, even in Renew, in EPP, on this issue on the importance of social policies.
Thank you very much. I think you mentioned very good points. Brussels is not a spaceship. They are related to the ground also. And I think what you also say, it's important, it's a democratic process of discussion and exchange of views. I think this is really, we should go also this way. This is why we are here. And also at the point that we have to think also on women as entrepreneurs is also a very important point. We try always to invite every group, but sometimes it's not possible.
Yeah. Okay.
But we have this also in mind, and yeah, I think this is good. But now we had really the focus on Scandinavia. Now we're coming to Eastern Europe, and I think if we say the difference, also Poland has a minimum wage. I think in Luxembourg we have around 12 euros per hour as the minimum wage. In Poland between 3 euros 40. Is the minimum wage, if what I read, but in the same time I have to say Poland is an economic success story in Eastern Europe, Central Eastern Europe, and we would now to hear what is their perspective on this discussion. So we have as next intervention Michal Drozdowicz from the permanent representation of the Republic of Poland to the EU. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for invitation to join this discussion. It's very useful for us to hear the voice not only from the countries, but also from European Parliament and from the social partners, like Mr. Soderstrom already said. As you mentioned, Poland is one of the countries which already introduced statutory minimum wage in national legislation, so on national level. So we are observe and a little bit skeptical how the Commission would like to introduce a minimum wage on the European level, because we already introduced the minimum wage on the national level. So we will observe the discussion, and we would like also to participate in the discussion. Of course, we note the latest action taken by the European Commission to strengthen the social protection and employment condition. And we are glad that the Commission launched the second stage on the consultation on the fair minimum wage. We think the broad involvement of stakeholders allows to take into account different perspectives, as we heard even today, and also needs and possibilities from the different point of view. We also think then the ongoing debate in the EU related to income level focus on the difference in GDP. I didn't heard that you mentioned it, but in the ongoing debate, we focus on GDP per capita between countries. Meanwhile, we think that there is much more useful indicator, as was put in by the Commission, so the ratio of the minimum wage to the average wage or the median, as it was mentioned before. Poland, as an example, has a significantly improved situation in this area, including bone level of wages and social labor standards. Moreover, we are a country that performs relatively well in comparison to other member states in this regard. So we're thinking that on the national level, we do everything to, let's say, put in the minimum wage and the social standard for our workers. Also, we gradually rising the social standards, and you mentioned the social pillar. So we are in the line with the social pillar and aiming to ensure a decent, fairly paid and stable work. Also, you mentioned about the minimum wage in Poland, and increased almost by half from 2015 to 2020. The current amounts of the minimum wage is 2,600 zlotys. And the hour minimum wage, as you also mentioned, is 17 zloty in 2012. And it is increased from 2017 by over 30%. So we're thinking that we will be part of the discussion and our voice will be, let's say, a little bit skeptical to the proposal of the directive. But taking into this account, we think that also the Polish government and our policy fall within the general direction postulated by the Commission. So the strengthening of social protection and improving employment conditions, also taking account the current pandemic and the situation on the labor market. Also, the Polish legislation regarding static minimum wage contains mechanisms that allow shipping the level of the minimum remuneration close to 50% and average remuneration of 60% of the median remuneration. So we are also thinking that the government are in the line with the direction postulated by European Commission and strengthen the social protection and employment condition, even in this very hard time. Our provision on determining the minimum wage for work contain mechanisms that allow shaping with the participation, of course, of the social partners. And this is the difference to the Scandinavian model, because we invite all the social partners and the government into the discussion on the minimum wage. Also, we are very open to discussion on ensuring fair minimum wage for workers in the union. We also analyzing right now the possible direction of various solutions and scenarios. Since the Commission has not proposed a uniform mechanism to set minimum wage right now, we're waiting for the draft proposal from the Commission. And we also thinking and estimating possible effects on the different options, also for the small and medium enterprises. We would like to point out as a Poland that all the action taken by the European Commission, and it's also mentioned before by the previous speakers, that the European Commission has to respect the division of the competence between the EU and its member states. Also, the different traditions and economic conditions should be taken into account, especially now after the pandemic. And we think that our specific approach to our legal instrument ensuring a fair minimum wage will be known as a more detailed are provided. Of course, we are considered that there are other soft instruments such as recommendation and guidelines, also taking into account the European semester, will be sufficient tool to monitoring progress in meeting criteria such as impact of rising the minimum wage on employment rates and also on rising living standard and reduction the risk of poverty. At the end, I would like to also mention that the adoption of the European minimum wage is an initiative that creates, from our perspective, opportunities as well as threats. If it's adopted, if it's necessary to guarantee a safeguards mechanism, especially after the pandemic, so the flexible solution that will allow countries for possible deviation from the adopted rules in the event of downturn of competitiveness of the member states' economy. We face a real crisis right now, and we think that the safeguards or the backstops in the mechanism is needed, taking into account the current situation on the labor markets. So we're also thinking that a good prepared impact assessment should reflect the impact of the small and medium enterprises, especially in the case of introduction the so-called HAL legislation as directive. And we are thinking still that the soft recommendation or the guidelines will be the sufficient way to introduce a minimum wage on the European level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this was now a very informative statement, also from the view of Poland. And I would like to make this link perhaps also to Ivan Stefanec, because Slovakia is also a Central Eastern European country. Are you sharing as Slovakian the position of Poland in this field? Is this really a point of view who is really sorted out to regions, or is this really a problem from you? What you say is a fundamental for all member states? Mr. Ivan, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Horst. I can tell you that I share this concern, and I like the contribution from Polish representative, because I share this view, particularly stressing the importance of subsidiarity principle, I think we should still keep the national competence in this case, particularly from the point of view that collective bargaining is different country by country, as we have heard by previous representatives. In some countries, state is a part of this negotiation, in some not. But basically, my point would be that I think all of us, we wish that workers will have a very solid wage and will have also good wage increase. The question is how to reach it. And I have my concern that we can reach it by some regulation and by some implementation of minimum wage across the countries. I think we can reach it by improving business environment and by really keeping current rules, because as I said at the beginning, wages will be always different country by country and region by region, and we just have to create the right framework. But I do not think that we should step into this framework by intervening some mechanism which is, in my view, against the current competencies. I would rather prefer to keep current competencies among European level and member states, and I would put much more importance on collective bargaining, particularly if it works.
Thank you. Do you think, I would only to add, is this, if we go in this direction, it's also a question I see now, what is coming out, also a fundamental question, is the European Union responsible, has it the rights to do such an approach? Are we coming not only to the same discussion about taxations and competition of taxation? Now we see it should be something like a minimum tax and a minimum wage. Is this going in a direction where we're coming to a social union, or is this too far forward, Mr. Ivan?
Yes, it's a good question, Horst, and it's a fundamental question. What we are going to basically unify, what kind of standardization we should have. I would rather go in the way to finally to have a functioning single market in place, because we have not completed single market yet. So particularly in the area of services, we have to complete single market, we have to build digital single market, and somehow we can rather talk about standards which shall be implemented, but in terms of tax rate, in terms of social negotiation, in terms of different wages, which will be always in the countries, I think it is the competence of national states and basically the result of functioning social market economy. Therefore, I think we should talking about this question, we should talk it from broader perspective, how all the mechanisms work in the European Union and how business environment works. Particularly, this is important now in COVID times, because there will be a lot of impact to employment. All of us, we have a lot of concerns about employment and unemployment, but talking about some mechanism of minimum wage, I think it's not just some aspect which can help to tackle this issue. I would rather talk much more about total business environment, how it is implemented, and how we can do better rules for implementation of single market, which is still the question in the European Union.
Thank you very much. If you say social market, we heard also from Mr. Angel, social market. The question is what we understand under social market. If I think about Ludwig Erhard, who has invented the social market in Germany, he says a functional market is a social market. Now it's the discussion, is minimum wage part of a functional market? So, now we are coming, I think, to the business sector, to the SME sector, to Mr. Jakub Binkowski. We heard a lot about this. Is it not against SMEs? It's together. Others say it's hurting SMEs. I heard, like I say, there are surveys around in the internet who are not really, I don't know how good they are, but they say 30% of SMEs are supporting minimum wage, 30% are against minimum wage, and around 15% says the wages are already too high. So what is the discussion with your companies about this? Is there also controversial, or you have a clear line what you want? Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. In the first place, it's a pleasure. And first of all, I would not like to repeat the argument about subsidiarity and strict division of competences. So I will just say that I share this view that social policies should, in general, remain the responsibility of the member states. And essentially, as a free market-oriented organization, we believe that no new regulations should be imposed if it's not obviously necessary. And in this case, we do not consider the EU regulation of minimum wages to be obviously necessary, because we can see, just taking a look at the data, that the wages convergence is already taking place organically at its natural pace, adjusted to the member countries' capacity. So we could look at Bulgaria, which increased their minimum wage by 100% essentially between 2007 and 2015. Lithuania, in the same period, increased their minimum wage by over 70%. At the same time, the minimum wage in Belgium rose only by about 20%, and in Ireland, between 2008 and 2015, the minimum wage rate didn't change at all. And now in Poland, we have this discussion going on about the raise of the minimum wage in the next 3 years, and we are about to reach the point of 950 euro, while in 2015 it was just over 400 euros. So we can see this convergence, and all of the given data seems to confirm that the group of countries which are naturally catching up consistently makes their social and labor regulations approach more and more ambitious without any new regulation at the European Union level. Therefore, having that in mind, we do not think that imposing a new regulation on minimum wages in EU is necessary. It could be also an excessive burden for the SMEs in some countries. It's not essentially the Polish case, I believe, having in mind that the proposals which are going on. What's more, we are afraid of turning the European pillar of social rights into hard legislation, because we believe that it can ultimately harm EU competitiveness, both internally and externally. Basically, the pillow, in our opinion, from our point of view, was about to be a soft law establishing the main directions of development for the member countries, social and labor policies. And meanwhile, it seems like it's kind of used to unify the standards of social protection and labor regulations across the EU. And then we come back to this matter of subsidiarity and division of competences. We share this view that, as I said before, social policies shall remain the responsibility of the member states. So essentially, that's our position on the matter.
Thank you very much. I think I want to add only to your point of view some questions or remarks by another member of the European Parliament, Pietro Fiocchi. He is mentioned that that a minimum wage would be really a danger for micro businesses and also that for Italian regions. Do you have this point of view also that it would be a danger especially for micro businesses, or it is in general a problem for the economy from your point of view? Or is this because if you say this, who is really tackling by the minimum wage? The large companies or the SMEs?
Basically, from our point of view, the first victim of the minimum wage, especially high minimum wage, are the lowest paid workers. But from this point of view of this regionalization, we believe that labor markets essentially vary not only on the country level, but also on the regional level and even the city level. We see that in Poland we have one minimum wage across the whole country, and we can see that the minimum wage rate in Warsaw, which is the capital of Poland, is basically, there is no issue about the minimum wage, because median wage and average wage here is much higher than it, and there is no case basically here of minimum wage. It doesn't affect the labor market here at all. But in the other regions of Poland, the minimum wage can be raised really technically too high from their local labor market perspective. So if we see that it is hard to set up a common minimum wage level for the whole country, establishing a common minimum wage for the whole EU by some kind of mechanism seems to be a really hazardous, I would say, project. So yeah, I share this view that it can be really dangerous from some regions in the EU.
So I think it's a regional problem. You think that some regions are not affected and some regions are affected. I want to come back to Marc Angel. Luxembourg has a high minimum wage. What was the effect on a low educated labor forces and micro business? What you have experienced with your 12 euros per hour is high compared. Can you say what the fears are in Poland? You have this experience in Luxembourg, or you cannot compare it, please?
It's difficult to compare. Just one remark about Luxembourg. Having the highest minimum wage doesn't mean that we have in-work poverty. We have still a lot of in-work poverty, because you have to consider, and we didn't talk about it, the whole relation of wages and minimum wages with the costs of living, and therefore it's not that having a high minimum wage, you're in that's a paradise for all workers. I just want to come back to the question of the micro enterprises. Minimum wages are a part of a whole policy mix. You can have other policies to stimulate micro enterprises and to promoting the local business with tax reductions, with social security, how much you pay into social security if you employ young people, if you know, there is other ways to help micro and family enterprises. I also want to come back that nothing is set in stone right now. We just started the second phase of consultation, and even because of COVID, it is prolonged. It lasts, and there is the summer break, of course. So the delay is put up to September 4th, if I believe, and part of it will be a directive, but a lot will be also recommendations, council recommendations. And I think the directive part will be more on labor conditions, and then so there will be a mix. I can only participate in all these questions the Commission asks, because so far, I think the first consultation part went very well, and I had the feeling the Commission listened. I hope that you share this with me. And now there's the second phase, and participate. And then we see, as I say, nothing is set in stone. And I want to just quote again here from the Commission press statement. I just quoted. There will not be one size fits all minimum wage. Any potential proposal will reflect national traditions, whether collective agreements or legal provisions. So, and they know that some countries have excellent systems in place, and it's not to destroy them, but it's just to ensure that all these systems are adequate, that they have sufficient coverage, and that they include everywhere enough consultation of social partners. So let's wait and see, and participate, and make it a dialogue between all the partners, and then I'm sure that they will come up with an appropriate mechanism to be put in place, which again, I repeat, will not be easy, and it will be quite technical, yes, unfortunately.
Thank you. you show that you are open for discussion. I think it's not easy to have 4 different opinions against you. I think I have four or less. Sweden is again, or not against, in exchange.
I wanted to put something, and I understand also the Eastern European position, but I just want also, for me, we are united in diversity in Europe, and but convergence and cohesion is very important. And there is a lot of difference between rich and poor within some countries, but also within the countries within the European Union. And this has also, we have to bring them closer together, especially if I see still the problem. And I'm very happy that there is an awareness now, and the Croatian presidency has put that on the table, the brain drain and the drain from labor forces from Eastern Europe to other parts of Europe. And this is also something, I believe that a lot of people love mobility to work in another country, but most prefer to be in their country with their family. And if we create decent living conditions where you just are not only able to survive, but to really have a decent life, then I think we could also have a better solutions to those kind of problems.
I think this is a very important point. You question the brain drain, and then also the worker labor's movement because of low salaries or chances. It's not only about if there's no facilities to work, then you can also not work there. But I think what is also mentioned by Commissioner Schmidt was that the minimum wage could be also a driver of innovation. But can be this not also a danger? Because I know if the work becomes too high, it makes sense to introduce new technology to replace the worker labor forces. And then we come into the discussion we had in Austria, make a taxation on machines. So I think it's just not something what is driving more in one direction then. And this is the one thing. And the second thing, I think COVID-19 crisis is a very good point, but we had now the experience from micro businesses that many, especially women, we have still this system that many owners of small companies, the wife is working in the company. And now with COVID-19 crisis, to save costs, they unemploy the family members, and the family members working for free without any social security because of the pressure. So is this not a little bit a shame? We're making minimum wage, the problems for micro businesses now becoming more social. In fact, we're driving more people to the black market, that families are working then without any security because only to survive? Or is this, I think this is a problematic thing. Who wants to answer this? Perhaps Soderstrom, is this a problem in Sweden, or is this, we're discussing this in Germany also, because it's making also gender equality damaging, it's a danger for families. Which measures are always social? Is this really, is all measures social? I want to give the question to you.
Oh, this is where I have to think while I speak. I'm not sure I'm able to answer just that question, but can I comment on the other interventions a little bit? Is that all right? Thank you. First of all, I think you said very wisely at Horst, you just mentioned, like if technology is taking over work that is done by workers today, yes, that might very well happen. And that is nothing we should be against, because this is what digitalization and technological development is all about. And that's why we need social dialogue in Europe, to be able to make workers be able to transfer to new jobs, to acquire new skills, to adapt to the modern globalized labor market. That's what we need to do, while keeping our competitive high wages, competitive and high, of course. I think that's just one interesting remark about the recovery and how we should look at the recovery in the years to come. I think Jakub made an interesting point here about that it's very hard to set a minimum wage that fits the entire country. That makes it even more difficult to set a minimum wage that fits the entire Europe, because regions are so different, and not only regions, but sectors are very different. That's what I made a point in my intervention before, that we have different minimum wages in different sectors because they all have different needs and circumstances and so on. And I think this is something to consider as well. Marc also said that we should have a dialogue on this, and I just want to underline how important this is. And I thank you very much for raising that. This is about how we should respond to the worst crisis we had for decades in Europe. I mean, it's devastating. And this is something that we shouldn't rush. Now we have a recovery package, we have a recovery fund soon, hopefully, that we will be able to spend a lot of money on investments and transitional workers and all that. But these kind of permanent measures, we really need to consider how to move on to ensure that we have legitimacy for the EU and support for the EU membership across Europe, because legitimacy and the view on what Europe should do looks different in different member states as well. I think that's very important. Then to what Ivan said about the internal market, I think boosting the internal market, the single market, at the heart of the EU really, is maybe the best tool we have for recovery. But this market also needs to be regulated, of course, and it's not about product regulations and regulations on services. It's about what we have both, for instance, rules against unfair competition, and we also have the whole package on social legislation when it comes to working time directives and so on, for instance. That also has to be part of the labor market and considered. And that's also why we are so strict on this in the Brexit negotiations. That's where it becomes very, very evident why we have this kind of rules in force. And that, of course, need to respect the treaties. And then just finally to what was said about, Michal, when you talked about the Polish situation and so on, that it's very important to have decent wages, but also decent wage increases and wage development. And I think there are so many different national traditions and ways here, but I think one sustainable way that has proven successful throughout Europe is strong social dialogue when it comes to ensuring good wage increases over time. And I think that's important to have in mind. And that's just want to reiterate what we proposed as, for instance, spending European money on trying to support social dialogue structures across Europe. And I think that would be useful in many countries to try to do this according to national models and traditions, for instance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was also a brief, good feedback. But I want to go back also to your point of regions and tradition. Mr. Drozdowicz, do you think really with a minimum wage, regions and problems who have already perhaps a problem, we read this, we have this also in Germany with some parts of the regions where young people are leaving the countryside of some regions, minimum wage would avoid this? Or is this, do you think really that's like this aspect that you say with a minimum wage with more social equality in this point in Europe, we would have less movement of labor forces? Do you think, I think what would your experience would be? What is the main problem that the Poland workers going abroad? Or is this a problem, by the way? Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, it was a problem, as I would say, because many of the Polish citizens during the crisis returned to Poland as a specific of the crisis, because we already seen in the 2009, when we have a first crisis, that the many Polish citizens who work abroad as a seasonal workers or cross-border workers return home, so return to Poland. And we face it also today because of the close of the borders and do not allow to join the social security systems in many member states. They have to return Poland, and there's not about the minimum wage, but the social protection. So I have to mention that it's not only about the minimum wage, as Marc said, because Marc said that the minimum wage will work against the brain drain. But we have to remember that there will be not equal paid in the whole Europe. There will be adjustment in the member states. So even if the Poland increase their minimum wage, the Luxembourg will have to increase their minimum wage. So the movement will be also outside of Poland. But I think that the social protection is one of the key, not only the minimum wage, but the social protection and the social program, as Marc said. And we are going in those directions that we not only have to increase the minimum wage, but also the social protection, especially for the families with children, as the famous program 500 Plus in Poland that was introduced, and fight against the poverty in the population. So also introduce the program that cover the people who are not intend to get minimum wage and do not intend to get higher minimum wage. So for them, we, let's say, focus to provide them the social benefits and to increase also their able to, let's say, join the market.
Thank you. This is a good feedback because we were last year in Timișoara in Romania, a very successful region where this income was coming up to 6% of the Austrian median salaries. And we got the feedback from the entrepreneurs. It's not only about the salary, also social protection, but it is also, if you're staying as a family in one city, you need very good schools, you need good universities, you need cultural programs. The young people who are very good educated are not only focused on salaries, but we want to have a developed region. So it can be only one segment. Should be in this answer then more the focus on infrastructure and education should be this, or if you see this as a package, is this perhaps the wrong approach of the European Union? Should be focused help more the infrastructure development, more education, and Mr. Drozdowicz?
Of course, we invest in all these sectors, even on the regional measures, because you think about the minimum, and we discussed the minimum wage, but we think that also the education is a key, the well-educated people and the well-paid people, and also the social protection. So we thinking that it should be a combined mechanism provided by the European Union. That's why some of the funds going to the direct to the region, some of the funds going to the education and providing skills. We have also the skills agenda, which Poland is very interested in. Yes, how to provide better skills for our citizens. So it's not only about the minimum wage, it's also about the social protection, the education, and all regional policy which developed the culture and the entertainment. And I think that should be, let's say, a whole package itself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think this is that we need a strategy, I think, but the European Commission is working also on this. But I want to come to Mr. Binkowski, Jakub. We heard also that from Oscar that different branches are different hit. Do you think the tourism sector, the hospitality sector, the retailer sector, do you think, what would be, from your point of view, I have this point of view, if we increase the salaries now in these sectors in tourism, and the people have higher unemployment and so on, would this not be an effect that these sectors would be struggling more, or is this, like we say, everybody has more in these pockets, he's spending also more money, so it's a balanced system? Jakub, please.
Yes, actually, this tourist sector is a specific one because of the COVID situation, right? Especially now. So basically, in general, of course, raising the minimum wage or establishing some kind of European approach to the minimum wage can affect mostly the sectors in which the wages are lower than in other sectors of economy. So basically, what we are afraid of is raising of unemployment in some sectors, of course, and essentially raising of the labor costs is harming to the businesses of those sectors. So especially in tourism, of course, and especially in the COVID situation, it can be very harmful.
Then I would come. I think this makes clear, but yes, please. Unmute, please. Yes, please.
Well, if people earn more, they can spend more too. We should not forget that, and you mentioned it. Sorry, we cannot. There's not just those who work and others who spend. I see it. We saw it when we raised the minimum salary by 100 euros last year in Luxembourg. That the consumption went up, and it's proven. So I think that's everybody knows that. That's one remark I wanted to make. I wanted to make a second remark. Oscar, when he said about legitimacy, he was right. And let me just recall that we will have the conference on the future of Europe, where we're debating now. This should have started already. It's postponed because of COVID, and I hope the Council will finally agree on it. We have to discuss bottom up with the population, with the employers, with the trade unions, with the civil society, what kind of Europe we want. And I think COVID has changed a bit this reflection that this feeling for social policies, and also in many enterprises for social responsibility, is growing in our society, as well as the environmental responsibility. Whole SDG, the whole Sustainable Development Agenda is getting more known, and people are realizing the importance, and that we cannot continue as we continued before. So that's why I said we should not waste this crisis. And in this question of the future of Europe, we will discuss if there will be constitutional changes eventually, and there will be also discussed, some will defend that the social protocol, all these social and environmental issues have to be brought up to constitutional level inside of Europe. So this will be a complicated debate, but this debate will take place and will also influence on all we have just been discussing. And then a thing you mentioned, Horst, was when you said, will young people leave regions because where there is a lot less work? The whole New Green Deal, the whole transition agenda is supposed to create more jobs on local basis. Alone the energy transition, you can have little producing companies in very rural areas where they create jobs. So there's a lot of opportunities in all these changes which are coming in the digitalization, in the transforming into a green economy. So there is also chances. So we should not say we have to come back to the world of before COVID and then later solve all the other problems. We have to solve all the problems right now together. And I know it isn't easy, but the wages is, as I said again, part of a policy mix. It's not the only thing. We can also have other measures which go in favor of the employers, which we have discussed already, and which are important and not to forget. We shouldn't only focus on the wages as a burden, but there is other things where you can take burdens away from enterprises.
I think, yes, this is a good point. Of course, you have to consume also with money, or without money you cannot consume. But then I have this other question to Ivan. Is this, if you say we have to now to tackle also not only the crisis, also the topic of the futures, if I read now, every member state tries to take down taxation on burdens on SMEs. At the same time, we want to increase the salary burdens. Is this a strategy? What it makes sense? Is this additional, both the less taxation, more money for the employees, or is this something, two strategies who are not a strategy because there is no strategy behind this? If you say on one way we want to take burdens away, and on the other way you put new burdens on it. So, what is your perspective on it?
My perspective is that in case of taxation, it is the same like in case of social issues. The competence is on national level, and I would not change it. I would not change it because it could really harm our competitiveness, as it was emphasized by many speakers today. But I'd like to come back to the point of consumption, which was raised by Marc. I agree with that if people have much more in pocket, they can spend much more. But we can achieve it also by lower taxes, for example. And talking about taxation, talking about the minimum wage, for example, minimum wage very often is applied to the people who start to work, for the young people. And in many European countries, they try to improve the situation of young people, just allowing them to pay lower taxation. For example, also in Germany, it is the situation that for people who have not enough working skills, who are coming just from schools to the labor market, they try to make situation for them easier and to make lower taxes. I see it as much more appropriate way to increase employment, right, and to increase job opportunities than just to apply minimum wage across the country or across the European Union, because as it was highlighted by many speakers before, wages are different not only country by country, but inside the country and also industry by industry. There are different salaries by different industries. So very often implementation of the same rules can harm industries and can harm remote, not developed regions. I see it as much better way to improve, let's say, regional differences, or to develop not so developed regions by helping them by different instruments than by minimum wage, which can be quite dangerous, as we said many times, for SMEs, for some sectors, and for some regions as well.
Very much, and I think now, if there are not also questions from the last chance, also from the guest participants here, from not the speakers, can ask also questions here now. I would come now to the round where everybody has his final statement and summarize their points, what they're thinking, what we should take out of this debate. So we start, I think, with Oscar. You were raising already your hand. Perhaps you give you what you wanted to say, and perhaps already going to a finalization from your points, what you take out of this discussion.
Well, first, I actually raised my hand to comment on the gender equality issue first that you mentioned and raised very wisely, I think. And I mean, you mentioned the issue of women working for free also in micro enterprises, in family enterprises. I'm sure that's a problem. That's a problem in all of Europe and also in Sweden that might be accentuated due to the crisis. But generally, women are more likely to lose their jobs as a result of the crisis as well, which is a very big problem. So I think we are to ensure and increase competitiveness, make sure that everyone is on the labor market, you know, to build a stronger workforce, we need to make it easier for women to take part in the labor market as well across Europe. And there we see structural problems that are still in force in many member states when it comes, for instance, to collective taxation. The reason for many women not to seek work outside the family business or so is that it's not profitable because it's too high taxes when you're taxed together. I mean, that's kind of national reforms that should be done, I think. And I think we should use the European semester also for that reason, to, you know, to recommend these kind of reforms, structural reforms that benefit gender equality, also investing in childcare and elderly care that really would affect female employment. I think that's very general remarks on that, but things that would help. Just to wrap up, thanks for a very interesting discussion. I heard lots of arguments for and against, very many interesting interventions. I mean, we are, as you know, I mean, our position is clear on this. We are very critical, opposing the idea of minimum wage. We really appreciate the Commission's and the Commissioner Smith's ambitions to provide for a more social Europe, to develop that idea more, but we don't think this is the way. I mean, for three reasons. About the legal base. We don't see a legal room for this in the European treaties, and they need to be respected. Second, we have well-functioning structures that we would risk to destroy if this is done, because that would be a first step towards more state or government intervention in all European labor market models. And third, I don't think it will be on target at all. It would miss the target because there would be so hard to find a benchmark that would fit all the member states, even if you try to, you know, navigate in a directive and so on. So again, thanks very much for an interesting discussion. Hope to see you again.
Very much. I think like this discussion will go on for a long time, that we will see us more often. But now the next speaker, Michal Drozdowicz please, your statement, what is you taking out of this discussion and what you would like to add?
Yes, thank you, Horst, for that. And thank you for the very interesting discussion. We are very happy that we joined this discussion and will be part of that. We're waiting for the German presidency to also, let's say, introduce this and to start discussion in the council, probably in October, when the proposal from the commission show up. I would like to, let's say, recall that we are a little bit skeptical about the proposal, and what we heard from Marc, that the Commission will propose directive and recommendation. I don't know if the European Parliament already know what will be proposed, so we will expect it, and we will of course prepare our opinion after we see the draft proposal. But to the end, I would like to recall that one of the questions from the, let's say, now debate, and one of the questions that the Commission state in their paper and the second stage of consultation will be about the social partners willing to enter into negotiation with a view to concluding an agreement under Article 155. So hearing that there is opposed to the proposal from the Commission, I don't think so that there will be agreement through the social partner on to enter into the force the Article 155. So we're still waiting for the legal base of the proposal of the Commission and waiting for the very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Jakub, please, your statement.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like also address this consumption matter. And of course, consumption can boost the economy. It can be done basically three ways. First, government simply distributes cash, just as the 500 plus program in Poland. Second, government raises taxes and other burdens and then redistributes it, but as well increases the costs paid by private entities. And third, the government reaches for less money than before, i.e. lowers taxes. And we prefer the third way, especially in the post-COVID environment, while we should focus on making the European economy more competitive internally and externally and avoid over-regulation. And therefore, we are also against setting up a common regulation for minimum wages at the EU level, as we believe that this wages convergence is taking place naturally and organically, and there is no need for regulation on that.
Thank you very much. And before we coming now to the political level, we had also the last questions or ADEC from Marek Dekro that he says, should we not be focused? I think we discussed this already here in the webinar, but I want to mention it. Should we not focus on the minimum wage? We should be focused perhaps more on the infrastructure of the regions, education, internet, and so on. I want to say perhaps you take this also in account in your statement, final statement. Now, Mr. Marc Angel, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this commission came out with the slogan, an economy that works for all. So it has to work for the enterprises, the smaller ones, the bigger ones, but most over also for the people who work, who this market has to function, but let's not forget that there's people working and sometimes working very hard in this market. What I want that we remember from this discussion is we cannot deny that there is in-work poverty. This is a phenomenon that exists in whatever systems, in whatever countries. In my country, where I said we have the highest minimum wage, it exists everywhere. It has different faces, this in-work poverty, but it exists. The same is with salary inequalities and the gender pay gap. And I think the idea of this minimum wage, not a harmonized one, not a one-fits-all solution, will help to tackle these three problems that I just mentioned. And I really hope that we will have within all the social partners. All this is only possible with a social dialogue. And I just want to say that these measures of the minimum wage does not imply that there will be no investment in infrastructure or others. We have the recovery plan, which is an instrument which will help regions. There is other policies within the European Union aimed at that. We are hoping that the Council will agree on a substantial higher multi-financial framework, and also on these recovery plans with the grants and loans. So all this is important. The minimum wage is not sucking away all the money. It doesn't mean that there is no other efforts being done. It's just the one part to tackle this bigger problem of growing of poverty within the European Union, the in-work poverty especially. And therefore, I'm a fan of this initiative, but I know that we have to consider all the national traditions and also even local and regional traditions and sectorial traditions.
So thank you very much for your balanced statement. And now, Ivan.
Thank you, Horst. I do understand the objective of people who propose that. They are talking about the improving of situation of employees, basically. But I have still a lot of concern about that, because I would rather go in the way, as I said, to complete single market. It wouldn't cost anything, just it costs a lot of money to not complete a single market. So I would rather prefer improvement of business environment in order to improve situation of employees. And coming back to the question of Mr. Marek Degro, I fully agree that just to fight against regional differences, we have to invest much more into infrastructure and into education. And here I think we are on the same line, even with my dear colleague MEP, and we talk about future of Europe. I feel that we understand that we have to invest much more into education, infrastructure, about digitalization, and also the whole plan of recovery fund is something which probably we'll talk later on. But coming back to the minimum wage, I do not think that we need it right now. I think we need another rules, and we have to focus much more on the improvement of business environment and not on the change of competencies, which is right now between European and national level very clear, and we have to respect subsidiary principle. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. I want also summarizing now what I got. I think what is very important, what also Mr. Marc Angel mentioned, we have to be aware there's poverty also in Europe. It's not everybody is rich. We have social problems, and we have also the approach that everybody can live from what he's earning if he's working, that he has a standard of living. I think for this we agree all. The point what we have to discuss is how to reach it. And I think this is the point why this discussion is very important, because I think everybody has a goodwill. Because also for business, it's important that we have in a society also who's supporting the business environment, so that everybody has to be included and have this feeling this system is fair. I think this is a very good approach, and this is also why such discussions are important. I think what we have to discuss is, of course, first, is the European Union really the right level to discuss it, or we should let it to the member states? Is this really the tool to reach the targets? We have examples in Luxembourg, perhaps, or Germany, where it has not these negative effects like mentioned, but otherwise it's fair to Eastern European countries who are already are growing economies. Is this intervention to traditions who are working already on like in Scandinavia? And I think this discussion will not soon over, but we have to see it in a broader way, background with all the tools we have from taxation, infrastructure, support. And I think if we are working together, if really in Brussels, who is not the airspace, or an UFO, I would say, then I think we're coming also to the right results, because the people expecting results out, SMEs, the employees. And thank you very much. Also, thank you to Marc Angel. You have not so easy, because you had 4 opinions who are not really to your adaptable, but I think this is really appreciated by all that you come to us and to discuss it. And thank you again to Ivan Stefanec, who was the host today, and thank you again to the speakers. You're invited also to our working groups at SME Connect, who is a network of 4 million SMEs. We're discussing these topics, and I have to say SMEs are broad. There are different opinions about every topic. We cannot say it's a monolith. So we have some SMEs who are in favor of the minimum wage, and we have many who are also against it. So the discussion is needed. Thank you very much.